Hi there. My name is Diana Jean Shemo. I'm the founder and co-director of Double Exposure Film Festival, which is dedicated to films that are either rooted in investigative journalism or that are works of original visual investigations unto themselves. We're here today to speak with Maliki Brown, who works at the New York Times Visual Investigations Unit. He's a senior producer there, a reporter, and co-director of the film Day of Rage. That's a short documentary that has been shortlisted for an Academy Award this year. Welcome, Maliki.
To Diana.
So why don't we start, Maliki, by just talking about Day of Rage, what it is, and especially where it broke new ground.
Yes, Day of Rage is a reconstruction of sorts of the Capitol riot on January 6th, 21. It was, the most violent attack on American democracy in recent times, and it was also the most documented attack. And us as a visual investigations team, we deal in visual, audio, and other evidence, and we collect that, join the dots between it, and so that's what we began doing as the attack on the Capitol was underway, and it recounts the prelude to the attack, the environment, the disinformation campaign that led people to the Capitol on January 6th, the participants who were there, and then what happened, a wave of violence that engulfed the building.
Can you tell us a bit about this process for creating this very meticulous reconstruction?
Yes. We understood right away as it was happening sort of the magnitude of the event and the need to capture as much evidence as we could. So, the team had been monitoring it. We assigned many more people to look at it as the violence grew. And then, the starting point there is really sweeping across social media, multiple platforms to find and download and archive as much documentary evidence of the day as we could. That grew to over 3,000 videos, in fact. And within that, there were dozens of live streams, which I can get back to in a while because they were quite significant. And then, the spine of our piece became a chronology, a spreadsheet that ran to 1,500, 2,000 lines that moment by moment goes through what happens that day. And so, that's the result of synchronizing and analyzing all of that footage to identify key moments, but also what we're hearing and seeing, as the day unfolds, and to sort of connect dots that might not have been immediately visible or understood.
So, Maliki, viewers are going to watch this for the duration of the film. They'll watch it, just for the time it takes to see it. But in order to make this film, you immersed yourself and the whole team, immersed yourselves in this material for weeks on end, thousands, probably tens of thousands of images. And I'm curious about what that felt like for you, to be immersed in this world that was super intense, very hard for most Americans, or many Americans, to watch. And yet for you were going right to the heart of it, day in and day out, for weeks at a time. What was that like for you to live in that space?
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, we had a problem to solve. We wanted to sort of clear away the fog of the chaos of that day and bring some clarity to it and understanding. And what we began to see was just the scale of the violence that was there, and that was something that we wanted to convey in the piece. But also, I think, and that's disturbing because, for our editors in particular and the producers who are reporting out certain parts of the day and what happened, you're reliving it almost because it's so intense. It's unfiltered. You're right there with the rioters. Most of this was filmed by them. And yeah, it's horrifying, really. But what is, aside from the violence, there's the if you like, the brainwashing and the infection of people's minds of this sort of virus of disinformation that led them there. And it was the lies that they had been sold by politicians and allies of former President Trump leading up to it, that people fully bought into. And that it was their patriotic duty to defend democracy, defend the Constitution, and they had every right in the world to be there, and that they were deputized by the president to carry out what they were doing. That was what really sort of came through and was very disturbing as well, paired with the violence and paired with the vitriol and the targeting of members of Congress as well.
Did that realization of the danger of disinformation and the way that it was leading people into behaviors, into new territory in terms of actions and mass movements, did that awareness affect the way you see your job going forward after this story was done? In other words, did you have the sense, a realization from the process of making this film, hey, there's a bigger story out there than we even realized. How are we going to tell that story?
Yes. I mean, I think, if you go back even to 2016 election, I mean, that was the election of Donald Trump is really an expression of people's grievances that I think, a lot of the mainstream media and the coastal media probably were caught unawares by. And if our job is to listen to people and listen to Americans, that was completely missed. And it's a sort of a failure, I think, on the part of the media. January 6th is a sort of another reflection of that. I think a lot of people were caught unawares that something like this could happen, even though it had been building up and gathering momentum. And so, the reason we called it Day of Rage is, I showed it to an uncle of mine, and he said, "My God, the rage of the people here." He's lived in America since the 70s, and his next line was, what a challenge the Biden administration has to try to sort of heal the country and bring people together. And so for me, I think that's something that we see continuing to play out with the politicization of January 6th, and that as a starting point for the next movement. And you still see a lot of people who embrace the sort of the idea of a stolen election, who are prominent coming into a midterm and a 2024 presidential election that really are litmus tests for democracy.
Speaking of disinformation and misinformation, can you take us through the steps that you took, the team took, in order to make sure that every frame you had was authentic and that you weren't using any material that was kind of altered or cooked in any way? What were those steps like?
Yes. First thing is try as much as you can to get the piece of footage from the original source. And by documenting it as it was happening, we were catching a lot of the footage that was coming in as people were posting it. So that really stood to us. Then talking to sources if we needed to. Very often we will turn what you might call open source on social media into a primary source who can provide you with other information, interviews, but also the raw media with metadata, including the hour, minute, and second of a piece of video. Then, as I said, we had dozens of live streams. Some of them were 4, 5, 6. One of them was 8 hours long. And they really allowed us to, because you've an accurate time starting point for that, and they carried us through, allowed us to trace the movements of people around the Capitol and through it once they got inside. And so that helped with our chronology and our spine of pairing up other footage, see what was going on, see what people were saying, who was uploading it as well, what was the momentum at those different points, and do they tally? And so it was a process of really corroborating every single piece of evidence against something else. Right. That's sort of in short what we did. It was a long, tedious, laborious process, and there were some tools, if you want, I can talk about them, artificial intelligence tools that helped us a little bit, but it was the laborious task of watching through and documenting everything and pairing it up.
Did you run into issues around antagonism toward the press when you were trying to secure this footage? I would imagine that in the crowd that was taking a lot of this footage, you had a good share of people who were very mistrustful of mainstream media. And here you are calling from the New York Times. Do they say, yes, we're happy to help you? Or did they say, the New York Times, I don't think so? How did you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the many sort of incongruities of that day is that although many journalists were attacked and media equipment destroyed, the participants that day filmed it from every single angle. And that was part of the sort of psychology, reading the story, the fact that they were proud to be carrying this out and were documenting it and showing it to their friends and families, communities back home. And so we understood that, as the dust settled, people would realize this was incriminating evidence against them and they would delete it. And that happened in a lot of cases. So we just ripped it as evidence and kept it. And if we felt the need to contact somebody, we did. There are some people, of course, who wouldn't cooperate with us, but there are many others out there who are independent videographers or freelancers who we contacted and provided us with their whole camera cards for the day and that kind of thing. And of course, we licensed that footage from them, but we didn't, that wasn't a major challenge, I would say, in producing it. Yeah.
All that we've been talking about, the scariness of the moment, the pressures of being sure everything is right, the sheer magnitude of the materials that you had to work with, I'm getting the impression that actually recognition for the cinematic quality of what you were doing was not front of mind in this process. Would that be right?
Yes. Yeah. We just wanted to provide a definitive account of what happened that day. And then as particularly around May, you saw the narrative change a little bit as an independent investigation was denied by Congress. And then some politicians on the right started to rewrite and reframe what happened that day. The importance of the film became more evident to us, and the need to be absolutely accurate in everything that we were putting out there to provide an indisputable truth. It was a story that you kind of needed to see and hear to believe it and to understand it. Anyway, that's what we sort of set out to do with it.
I know that it's still very early in the process, in the Academy Awards process, but I'm wondering whether you see any significance in the fact that a film that is so deeply rooted in journalistic rigor was shortlisted for an Academy Award. What does that mean to you?
Well, it's unexpected and we're delighted by it. And we've been doing what we call visual investigations as a mode, for the last 5 years at the Times, very much in a news environment, shorter pieces. This is by far the longest film debut for us. So we're delighted that the doc world is sort of appreciating it, in that way. But we did, deliberately take a kind of a cinematic approach to it. It's a piece that you couldn't have created if you had a crew that was being directed on the ground. You couldn't have been everywhere at once. Right. And aside from the risk to everybody, just the magnitude of the event, the scale of it. But within that, there was so much footage that, our editors, they could choose wide shots, medium shots, close-ups at certain moments when they're reconstructing scenes, almost with a cinematic effect. And the setup of the film, we deliberately, David Botti, co-director, and Natalie Renault, who was editing that section of it, deliberately, tried to create a more cinematic sweep into it and then build the momentum of the prelude to it. And that was with the sort of the everyday Trump supporter and the idea of sort of the Pledge of Allegiance and the patriotism that suffused the whole day and ended up in this sort of dramatic irony of the attack on the Capitol. So we took a different approach than we usually do to it. So there were, it wasn't to reach a documentary audience. It was just to tell the story in the most impactful way that we could and to draw people into it and really convey its significance.
That's actually kind of been the animating spirit behind Double Exposure, that there's this amazing explosion of creativity at the intersection of investigative journalism and visual storytelling. We've just seen such great works coming out of this space. So we're watching this very closely. For us, this recognition is kind of gratifying because it's also seeing what we've been saying for a few years, and we're really excited to watch and see how this is going to turn out. I wanted to ask whether you could also just talk about other documentary films that draw on or that drew on social media, open source material to tell a story, and whether any of those influenced you in the making of this film.
Well, we in terms of process and that kind of things, I think we stuck to our own mode and how we go about these ones. We had just come off Breonna Taylor investigation, what happened to when the police killed her. And, although that was a totally different story because there was no video footage or evidence of that other than the crime scene evidence after the fact. But we were able to reconstruct what happened. And what was key there was hearing from the police as they were deposed. And so for us, hearing from the rioters as they were carrying this out was sort of a guiding principle of the piece. But other films that I've admired, I mean, there's a few. The Square, going back 10 years or so ago, Karama Has No Walls. Sebastian Junger did a really good one on, I think it was Syria on Fire or something like that. But it was about the fall of Syria and the growth of ISIS. There's a bunch of films like that. I'm trying to think what else is there out there. Yeah, but anyway, I'd love to see this mode, explored more in the documentary world, and we're actually exploring that at the Times. Is there potential for what we do to be carried into that sort of longer form? Because I think what audiences have really appreciated with it is the evidentiary nature of it and how you're kind of carrying somebody through what that evidence means, and the transparency with which you do it so that they can believe it, they can see it for themselves. And then you put it in sort of the wider context of whatever that story is. So that's just some of the feedback that we've got, particularly in our YouTube audience. They kind of, there's a point now where we get messages saying, are you going to do a visual investigation on whatever the event is,
Well, are you? I mean, I could think of any number of films or any number of stories off the top of my head that would lend themselves to this kind of investigation, this kind of visual investigation, but it's a huge lift, isn't it?
It is. It can be. It doesn't have to be all the time. Like one of the most impactful pieces that our team did last year was the Kabul drone strike, as the American forces were withdrawing, that killed a family, including 7 children. And, it just didn't add up from the very beginning. But very quickly, Hayley Willis, who is also a producer on Day of Rage, she found exactly where the strike happened. The magazine happened to have a reporter still on the ground. He went to the scene, interviewed the family, filmed the scene. Then we analyzed it, sent it to weapons experts, and it started to there were holes in the narrative of emerging, and then went to the workplace where the aid worker who was targeted in the airstrike was, and we could see that he was filling his car not with explosives but with water bottles because the water had run out in their neighborhood. And so it was an absolute failure of intelligence that killed these people. But within a couple of weeks, we were able to call the team that produced it. I had nothing to do with this story. My colleagues were able to, show the Pentagon, look, you got this wrong. And up until that point, they had been calling it a righteous strike. you know. So you can work in just a couple of weeks, but you can obviously spend months or a year on an investigation too.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Diana. And thanks to Double Exposure, for featuring us in the work last year and the year before as well. It's great.
We'll look forward to welcoming you back. See you at Double Exposure.